All right, guys, good morning from a very cloudy San Diego, California. My April road trip wraps up today, so I'm looking forward to getting home. We have Rachel Book with us again. I love doing these with you, Rachel. I'm fired up about today's topic because I think there's some really interesting things to discuss. I'm going to kick it over to you here in a minute, but what we're going to talk about today, everybody, is if we ran into our younger selves who were just starting their careers, what would we tell them? And Rachel has an interesting lens on this that she'll probably start with, but considering that graduations are happening, she wanted to make sure we touch on that. So, Rachel, do you want to start with that? And then I'll pull a few threads with you and then I'll jump in.
Sure, absolutely. So it's interesting. I started my career when I was really young. I was 20, maybe even younger. And I was thrown into a situation, and it was a great opportunity, but it was definitely well beyond what most 20-year-olds would find themselves in. I had finished my degree. It was a company that was spinning off from its parent company, and they hired me as a smart kid who can help out with projects and the IPO. And so I just did whatever it took. And I had no idea what I was doing, right? Like many of us when we're starting out. And I think part of that is the gift. I think sometimes when we know too much, we get worried or we get apprehensive or we're not sure. But I just jumped in all in. And so I think the advice I would give myself is it's okay to slow down sometimes and ask for direction or guidance, right? I think when I was told, hey, this has to be done, I was just like, okay, I'm going to do it no matter what. And I think as we try and get things done, challenges come up, right? We rely on other people for pieces of whatever it is that needs to get done. And I think when I was young, and I've seen this in other early career professionals, is they're not sure when it's okay to ask questions, to calibrate, to get feedback midway. I think sometimes you realize that priorities can differ, right? Things that are really important to me because I have to get this project done might rely on people that have other more important things to do. And so the advice I would give myself is take a beat, slow down, ask questions, check in, right? To make sure that what was still important 2 weeks ago when the original assignment was given is actually still important and it needs to get done the same way. So I think that's the first thing I would say. So it's both a blessing and a curse of being clueless.
I asked you this earlier. I'm going to ask it again. Do you remember the feeling of going too fast? And that's why you're saying that? Because your answer earlier was pretty good. I want everybody to hear what you said.
I remember feeling that I needed to go fast. It was this pressure that I was putting on myself. So I realized that I was going too fast. I realized that I didn't always have all of the information. And I realized that other people were sometimes more involved than others when it came to chipping in, chiming in. I don't think I knew why. And I don't think I felt empowered to sort of say, hey, wait, is this still something that I'm supposed to be doing? Or how do I get this additional piece of information to make sure that I can get it done? So I remember feeling like I had this immense responsibility to get something done. Um, didn't always have the right information, didn't always have the right resources, but I didn't feel empowered, right, to speak up. So I remember feeling that. And this is something that I've noticed, in other people along, ac- across the years. As we celebrate more birthdays, right? We observe, we learn from others around us.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's super interesting. I like that. What was the name of the company? You okay saying it?
Yeah, so the company was called Net2Phone. It was the first company that did voice over IP. So back when making phone calls through your computer was cutting edge and very cool. It was spinning off from its parent company, which was IDT. And essentially it
Oh, I
was,
remember asking.
yeah, so this was, pre Y2K. Exciting times for those of you who remember. Everyone was going public. It was the dot-com boom or bubble or however you want to phrase it. And I was hired in as a project manager. And they said, hey, we need someone to help us with this IPO. And so I just jumped in and they said, okay, we need you to plan the roadshow. I planned the roadshow. They said, we can't uh, use our parent company's finance and legal department anymore. We need you to go hire people. And so I just hired people. That's actually how I got into HR and recruiting. So the best way that I learned was actually through interviewing candidates. I would say, tell me how you would describe this technology to somebody who wasn't familiar with it.
And you just made that up as you went?
Well, yeah, I kind of did, right? So I jumped right in. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I think that was, again, both a blessing and also a curse. So those years were crazy. I mean, I hired like hundreds and hundreds of people each year. But again, it was breakneck speed. And I think some things we were just moving ahead like a speeding bullet. And I think it's because I didn't know enough to say, okay, slow down. Is this the right way? Is this the right timing? You know, do we have all of the right pieces in place?
I think that's interesting. I think that's good though. I like not knowing what you don't know
Yeah. It's a
because you don't know what to be afraid of.
so that
So you
right.
just keep doing.
And that's why it's a blessing and a curse, right? So this is why kids are, remember when your kids were small and they were like 3 or 4 years old and everything's why is the sky blue, right? And it's because they don't know better, right? And they're not worried that people are going to judge them, and so they just ask. They're not worried about being embarrassed or somebody thinking, oh, you should have known that. And I think as we get older, we develop all of these complexes and all these insecurities and all these anxieties. And then we are worried about asking. And so if we're giving an assignment and we're not really sure and we have a question, there are some people, and I've done this for sure throughout my career, not so much anymore because I think one of the blessings of celebrating more birthdays is you care less about what people think, or you get more established in your reputation of where you're doing well, that you feel more comfortable and confident saying, oh, actually, I don't know anything about that. Can you explain it to me, please? But when you're just starting out, I think most people are so worried about proving themselves that they're hesitant to ask. And in the days before ChatGPT and before everything was available online, I mean, there was the fake it before you make it. And so you don't ask questions, right? So sometimes you jump in and you just figure things out, and that's the blessing. But I think the counterpoint is when you might hesitate asking and then you don't get the right kind of guidance, where maybe your manager or your parent or your mentor or your colleague would be thrilled, right, to guide you and share some of that missing information.
Yeah. And when you look back, would you say that you had bosses that knew that you were going through all that, so they let you go through it? Because some people, I think, experience leaders, bosses, managers, whatever you want to call them, in their younger years that might alter the trajectory of their behavior at work because they were toxic, slightly toxic, not authentic, didn't believe in transparency. Like I've met people who experienced rough starts with bosses. I'm sure they own part of it because it's always a two-way street, but it sounds like where you started, you had people that actually allowed you to go on that swim by yourself.
They did. And looking back, it was kind of crazy that they did, right? So I was 20. I had finished my degree. I did it mostly virtually and abroad. Again, I'm the first in my family to have a college degree and a corporate career. So I didn't have any mentors or guidance, from that end. And I got offered a job and I showed up at work and I just started doing what they asked me to do or what I thought needed to be done. And so it's kind of crazy that they let me plan an IPO roadshow when I was 20. It's kind of crazy that after 9/11, unfortunately, as the company was winding things down, they sent me around the country, basically laying people off. It was horrible. Um,
At 20, still
so I think
20?
I was 21 or 22, but they sent me down on my own to close down. They had acquired a company down in Florida, and they sent me down to basically notify 100 or so people that the company was going to be closing down. And I was so young, I couldn't even rent a car. I had to find
Oh,
like some random, and I just showed up. And I think I was like, wow, I've never done this before. So I was aware of that and I was aware of the gravity of the task. But I think because I was so young and clueless, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I just went in and did it. Um, that got very exhausting after a while. I was hearing rumors that people were calling me the angel of death. And so I stepped away, and that's another story for another episode of what I did next. But yeah, so I think it's a little bit of a blessing, right? I think they saw me, they're like, hey, here's, you know, she seems smart. She's a doer. Let's just give her stuff.
you skipped ahead in your career probably a decade.
Possibly, right? And so I think
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
But the question is,
Those are career builders.
but the question is, like, the time that's spent during those 10 years, again, could have been meaningful, right? So that's why, again, there were shortcuts, which is awesome, but I
Mhm.
also probably missed some steps that could have helped me along the way, especially early on. And so I think I'm always soaking up information from people, always looking for guidance of people who've taken different paths than I have, right? So that I can fill in those gaps.
Yeah, this isn't going to be a boring part of the dialogue, but my comment to my younger self would be very much the same.
Yeah.
Like I have a song that rings around in my head all the time. Like I can't get it out of my head. I sent it to our producer Bella. She and I were having a discussion a month or two ago. She graduates next weekend, I think. Bella, you can send me a thumbs up on our WhatsApp chat, but she graduates from Texas Tech next weekend. So if you have a minute to post comments in any of these podcast forums, say congrats on your graduation and good luck in life to our producer Bella. But I was telling her because she was stressing about I need to get a job, I got to do this, I got to do that. And I was like, man, looking back, I wish I would have chilled way out because life is going to happen at whatever speed it wants to give it to you. Buffeting against the universe's pace it wants you to move at just causes frustration and probably burns up some relationships along the way. And I say probably for the broader audience. For me, it did. I mean, I lost relationships at work and probably some personally if I really sat down and thought about it because of the energy and aggressive nature in which I approached the beginning of my career. And I'm still aggressive, but I mean, it was my 26-year-old self because I started at 26. So I was 6 years after you started because I joined the military at 17. My mom had to sign me in because I couldn't sign a contract. I wasn't 18 yet. And I ended up deployed to Iraq for the first Gulf War at 19. So I was like one of those kids you hear about in the songs, like that there's 19-year-old kids out there carrying rifles, defending freedom, all that stuff. That was me. So my lens of the world was vastly different than most 19, 20, 21 year olds. Less than 3% of the US served in the military. There's less than 1% active right now. So the chasm between the society that the military protects and the people in the military and their mindset and their understandings and their views of the world are like this today. And when I got out in 93. I went, I was at a nuke site in upstate New York, Seneca Army Depot, and I was already driving to Rochester learning how to fly. My cousin owned a flight school called Bill Law Aviation because I wanted to be a pilot. So at 22, 23, I was learning how to fly airplanes and I became a flight instructor and a multi-engine guy, and I was flying freight at night, and I was getting my undergrad during the day. So I was working and flying and going to school 18 hours a day. There were long days, um, and I never thought I'd be in corporate America. Like my dream job was to be a FedEx pilot, twice a month out of DFW to Japan, flying boxes, me and a co-pilot, or me and the captain. That was my trajectory. And for a variety of reasons, that didn't work out. And it's not a woe is me story, it's just life. So I ended up moving to Dallas, where my mom and stepdad lived. And I started at a place called Affiliated Computer Services. And I didn't know what corporate America was. I was a soldier and a pilot. Those are two things that aren't an easy blend. And one thing about soldiering and flying, when you're entrusted with lifting metal off the ground in the middle of the night, I was a 25-year-old captain at the time, left seat driver out of Rochester to Teterboro, New Jersey, Hartford, Brainerd, Connecticut. Like I had all the Northeast airports memorized. I could probably even still bring up the radio frequencies for some of them. I know Rochester's 118.3. So if there's any pilots out there, oh yeah, 118.3. Um, but I wasn't prepared for coming to work with what I would call civilians because the two jobs I had before, if you want to call them that, careers, missions, whatever, were very disciplined and very. Everyone knew what the mission was every day. Like there was no white space of, oh, what am I doing today? Like, I mean, my life from 18 to 26 was not completely mapped out, and I wasn't a robot. It was just you knew what the mission was, and you knew the woman and the or the man to your left or right in uniform or at the airport, on live taxiways and in hangars. It's a dangerous environment. These are You have to be really paying attention and hyper focused all the time for your safety, for the safety of people around you. And so when I got to corporate America, there was none of that. Like even at a place like ACS, and I told you guys what that was like a little bit my first couple of years in corporate America. It was hardcore, go fast, grow. Not a lot of culture in terms of associate engagement or client empathy. Just grow, 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 which is good. I learned a lot, but there was no harmonious nature about people. It's a weird way to put that because I've been thinking about what I was going to say on this episode. Like the lack of esprit de corps for the brand you work for. And some people really had it, but for the most part, people. Oh, I work for at ACS. I work at GenPass. I work at Visa. I work at AT&T. You know, it's not like I'm a soldier. Like there's a difference between what people say they do in certain genres that you can tell if they're engaged in the environment or not. So for me, it was like jumping into cold water. And me now, if I could talk to that 26-year-old, I'd say, lighten up, like, take a breath. Uh, Whatever's happening in jobs like we do today, Rachel, or when you were 20, 21, flying around the country, or me at ACS doing projects, and I was in sales and relationship management, talking with customers. It's okay. Like mistakes are going to happen because you're moving so fast, and there's never enough resource and never enough people and never enough this or that. Just use your instincts and try to be thoughtful. And I wasn't. Like the first 10 years, I almost tried to will whatever environment I was in to have esprit de corps. And I did find unique ways to do that, at least for the teams I was responsible for. Now, some people, and I still talk to a lot of those folks. Like I have a, a really nice tale of relationships that have come out of the beginning of my career. Some of them joined me here at Check Call, like that I've known for 25, 26 years. So like there's one person that joined us here that literally has known me in every decade of my existence from 20 to 50 and has watched me grow. So it's interesting getting that feedback from her when we do talk about this topic, and her too. Like when you're blessed to be with people that long, you get to see real change and it builds real relationships. That would be number two, is the relationship front. I didn't see the need for relationships in the beginning. The relationship was, hey, I need that TPS report, or hey, what's the status on this? Like I never took a minute to say, how are you today? And that's okay. Like, and it's because you don't do a lot of that where I came from. Again, it's not a woe is me. It's just everyone has an interesting entry point story into their careers. Everybody.
Yes.
Yours is super
Yes.
interesting. Mine is super interesting. Bella's is going to be super interesting because you will get hired, Bella. You're going to experience all this, and everybody
Mhm.
else watching has a story of being injected into a workforce that isn't completely aligned. So to save myself some skin, my younger self, here's the third thing, and I'll kick it back to you, Rachel, is to be more open to be collaborative. And I wasn't. It was just take the hill, take the hill, take the hill, and whatever was happening around me, the trail of bodies I left behind me, because they're like, I don't want to work that hard, because some people are like that. Some people who like to run fast would keep up with you or want to keep up with you, but you should try to bring everyone with you. And I would dismiss those who would lag behind. Oh, they're not cut for it. I mean, again, that's the 18 to 26-year-old self who comes from an environment where you better cut it. There is no gap of, oh, he's just having a bad day. Not in the units I worked in the military, or when you're flying aircraft. There is no bad day. Bad days there are really bad days. So you have to always be elevated. I didn't know how to bring that elevation down to the moment. Maybe the word's calibrate. I didn't know how to calibrate my energy.
So interesting because we're really saying something very similar. right? What the theme in both of our recollections is that what needs to be calibrated is sometimes the sense of urgency, right? And that's one thing that I've noticed in my work with transitioning service members and veterans who are looking to enter the civilian workforce is that sometimes the most jarring feeling of dissonance, right? So you show up, after, an experience like what you described, where the work that you're doing is life and death, right? The stakes are high. There's a shared mission. The sense of urgency is, again, life and death. And then you show up in some corporate conference room and people are stressing out about a fire drill that involves a PowerPoint presentation, right? And that can seem so unimportant, right? And I think that dissonance can sometimes be really hard for people. So I think sometimes in our youth, when we don't have the benefit of perspective and life experience and professional maturity, when our brains are still developing, we think everything's equally important and we don't know how to distinguish or discriminate. And so in my experience, I was relying on people to do things because I had to get a task done. And so I thought that was the most important thing in the world, when maybe it really wasn't. And I think for you, right, and I probably also didn't value the relationship piece as much because we were focused on the task and getting it done, because you and I are both people who have a bias towards action. We're achievers. We just want to get it done, right? That's where we get our satisfaction. And so spending time, shooting the breeze about somebody's weekend plans may have felt like a waste of time, but
Yeah.
it actually is a better investment long term. One thing I learned from a colleague at Fidelity Investments, her name is Pam Everhart. She's fabulous and fascinating. She would always tell people R before T, relationship before task. It just comes first.
R.
R before T,
I
relationship
mean,
before
I
task.
love that. R. Okay.
Yeah. And so that,
Did she coin
I'm
that,
sorry.
or was that handed
Oh
down?
no, that's
Did she
hers.
coin?
That's hers. She's famous
That's
for
her.
it. She runs
I
Fidelity's
love it.
public policy, government relations. She's an attorney. She's a serious advocate and executive champion for their Black Employee Resource Group. So yeah, Pam Everhart, connect with her on LinkedIn. R before T. And I think as we get older, we slow down a little bit. We're not in as much of a rush. And so I think for younger people starting out, right, the advice that you're hearing from us, and what I think is really good to consider is that it's okay to take a second and catch your breath. It's okay to find trusted advisors in your life, in your work, and find someone who's not your boss, right? Find somebody who is older and wiser than you, who has experienced more birthdays than you, who has been through more challenges and more change. And just ask them, hey, how would you handle this? Or I'm going to approach it this way. What do you think? Because I think fake it until you make it is not authentic. And I think
It's not.
when people feel this pressure to fake it before you make it or pretend that you know what you're doing, even though you don't, this is where missteps sometimes happen. And one piece of advice I will give to all of you who are just starting out, we know that you don't know a lot, right? So if you've just graduated college and it's your first job, like everyone knows that. And so I think owning it, showing that you're willing to do the work to figure it out, right? So if you're not sure about something, I would advise against going to your boss or to a manager and saying, I don't know how to do this. Tell me how to do it. Right. That's not going to fly. But if you say, hey, this is the first time I've ever done this, I've asked around, I've done some research. I believe that the best way to approach it is blah, blah, blah. Am I on the right track? Right. That shows that you have the initiative, you did your due diligence, you're willing to put in the hard work, but that you're checking in because you know you've never done it before, especially if the stakes are high. So I think remove that pressure from yourself. I think the other piece is sometimes we feel so much pressure to just jump in and be successful right away. And again, Bella, we're talking to you too, but also to everyone out there who's graduating and figuring out what they want to be when they grow up, or more importantly, what they want to do when they grow up, because what we do is not always who we are, right? That's
Yes,
actually a really important distinction, right? When you ask someone,
it
what do
is.
you want to be when you grow up? Like, not everyone identifies themselves with their job. And this is why, in some cases, some people gravitate less towards certain lucrative career paths because they don't feel that they can be a whatever. But if you just say, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? How would you like to spend your working hours? Right? It broadens so many opportunities. But anyway, that's a tangent. But I think some people jump into certain career paths because somebody tells them, hey, you should be an accountant. And that's why you have so many people who are just miserable, like crunching those numbers every day, because they didn't really think through, is this how I want to spend a significant portion of my waking hours in the, I don't know, 40, 50
Yeah.
years to come. And then they jump in, and then sometimes it's too late, or you feel like it's too late because you've already invested so much time, so much education. So I'm curious what you think, Patrick. Like, when is when should somebody recalibrate their career plans? If you're 2 or 3 years in your career and you're like, ugh, I don't think I really like it, what would you advise them to do? Do you cut your losses and switch? Do you give it another shot?
Um, I, I have lots of hot sports opinions on that.
Okay.
Like, I'm a fail fast person.
Yeah.
Like, don't lollygag on a concept or an idea or a thought. Just execute. And that goes back to where I come from, right? Like, that's never changed in me. If I see an objective, I track to it and I don't come off of it, right? So, but if I'm need to come off of it because something's jacked up or something's just going horribly wrong, just stop. Like, don't. Sometimes it's not worth fighting through, and I think that's with careers too. I've told people, oh my God, dozens of times in my career that I knew were struggling, had the courage to tell me they were struggling with what they do every day. Um, tra- uh, on accident ran into people who just said, "Hey, you have a minute, Patrick?" Like, hadn't didn't work for me. Just knew I was okay talking with people about career. I would say then just go, because if you're not happy, it's not worth it. Like, life is this long, and are you going to spend like this much of it miserable? It's not. It's not good. I have had blessings over my entire career. No real curses. I've created some of my own curses because sometimes I'm an idiot, but mostly just blessings. And it's because I focus on leadership. Like, I love leading people. I could do this job at Goodyear Tires or Kodak or wherever. I didn't plan to be a payments person. It wasn't anything. I told you I wanted to be a FedEx pilot. So you go from being a pilot to this is it's much different. But what makes me get through the hard days doing sometimes the work I don't want to do is I get to lead people, and I'm good at it more than I'm not. So I that gives me energy. So I share that with people. Like, if you don't like being an implementation manager for XYZ, what about being an implementation manager do you like? What part don't you like and what do you like? And if you can identify the do you like, then hold on to that and be the best implementation manager you can. And the stuff you don't like doing, okay, but have a positive mental attitude about the part that you do like. And if you can't get there, then a wholesale change might be good. Wholesale changes aren't bad if you're just miserable at what you're trying to do. Go ahead, Rachel.
It's really true. And one thing I've really had the privilege to focus on in my career, and this is before I got to Check All, but I spent probably about 12 years before I joined Check All, helping companies really transform their legacy hiring practices to access untapped talent pools, also known as establishing diversity recruiting strategies, right? This is not saying women are better than men, Black people are better than white people. It's about broadening access to talent. And so, one of the things I always looked at was, where is there talent that we are just not accessing because we're not looking in the right places, right? And a lot of those talent hubs or talent pools were career changers, transitioning veterans, people returning to the workforce after extended career break, retirees who are looking to come back to work, people with disabilities that had a hard time without the accommodations needed to go through the regular hiring practice or the regular employment situation. And so, one thing that I noticed specifically with people who were entering the contemporary workforce after time away, so either they were in a different place or they weren't working at all, is that they had a chance to really think back and say, what do I really want to do? And so I get asked a lot, like, how do I know what I want to do? Right. And so I would always ask people questions about that really touch on what you just mentioned before. Like, do you really have a passion and you want to work in the healthcare industry, for example? And you may not care if you're a project manager or if you're a marketing manager or if you're in HR. You just really believe in furthering access to healthcare for everyone, right? Some people are really motivated by that. So for Patrick, you didn't necessarily care about payments. Some other people are just really motivated by payments or by finance. I think there are other people who really don't care, like you. Like, you can work in any sort of industry as long as you're doing the work that you love. And so it's such a great opportunity to take a step back and say, where do you get your energy? What's important to you? What are you good at that would differentiate you from everyone else, right? What are the skills and experiences when you look around you and you see other people doing the same thing as you, whether it's at school, whether it's in volunteer activities, whether it's at work? What sets you apart? And then which aspects of that bring you joy? And then just make sure to overload whatever it is you're doing with more of those things, because that's going to get you on the right path. And then, on the fail fast piece, I couldn't agree more. I think some people stay in situations that they don't enjoy. And besides for being miserable, they usually tend to make everyone around them miserable, right? If they're not enjoying what they're doing. And there's so much choice out there. I think, especially recently with the great resignation, with transferable skills, right? There are ways to make pivots into different functional areas, into different industries, and you're not stuck. You're probably not stuck where you are. I'm speaking to our audience. So really think through that and don't stay somewhere where you're not enjoying, where you're not contributing, where you don't have the right support systems, because life's too short for that.
Yeah, I would tack on just because I think it's important, and I mentioned it to you earlier. Like having bosses earlier in your career, luck is a huge part of it because sometimes you don't get to pick your boss. You
Right?
you may be able to pick your job, but it, interviews go both ways. Like they're trying to figure you out, and you're probably too inexperienced or young or whatever you want to plug in, which aren't bad things. It's just the nature of what people
Mm-hmm.
are at that part of their career. You don't know how to read a boss that's interviewing you. And then a lot of corporations send talent executives or talent management to you first. And then you think that's what the company's about. And the reason I'm getting into that part is I had a boss who will remain nameless because this person's still out there operating. Um, this person thought my aggressiveness was about an agenda, uh,
Mm. Like your own
conquering more than
ego or your own
yeah,
purposes.
all the above. Like insert whatever you want. Like I got counseled a lot about what are you trying to do here? What do you can't run the place on year one, Patrick, because I was quite aggressive up and down the chain of command of what I thought was good or bad. I've always kind of been that way, and they weren't used to that. But I didn't have an agenda. I was just highly motivated. If you said, Patrick, paint that wall blue, I'll have it done ahead of time and under budget because I see that as winning. Like I have an insatiable need to win. Now that doesn't mean be first at everything and leave everyone behind. It looked like that because I didn't have the skills to dialogue or demonstrate or collaborate properly so we could win together. Like I said that earlier, I would say to my younger self, be more collaborative and bring everyone with you. And the people that can't keep up, maybe they can't for a good reason. Don't just dismiss. That's what I was doing. And this person gave me a book. They left it on my desk, and it's The Prince. Have you read it? Have you heard of it?
Mm-mm.
The Prince, Machiavelli,
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Okay.
The Prince. And I'm like, oh, a gift. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. Because and Bella will put the link in if people want to read it. It's an interesting read on behavior. But I was 27 years old when that book got left on my desk. But it was a message from above, my boss is, to chill out. But they didn't know
Yeah.
how to say it properly, and I didn't know how to receive it. So it was this. So when
And
young
that's what we
people,
talked about last week, right? That's what we talked about last week with emotional intelligence. When you don't explain, people make up stories in their head about what they think is
that's
happening
right.
ahead of them.
So here's the punchline. Like I didn't either because I was too dull or I didn't make the brain space or I didn't know how. I didn't let it affect me. I didn't look at that book and say, "Oh, I'm doing bad." I'm like, "Oh, okay, keep going." Like no matter what kind of boss you get in the beginning of your career, be true to yourself. That's the fourth thing I'd say to my younger self. And I did do that, whether it was on accident or on purpose. I just stayed true to who I was. And my authentic self is usually what you get. Not everybody likes the authentic Patrick, but it's what they get. And there's no guessing. Like I would never leave the prints on someone's desk to read without talking to them, right? Like that's not leadership. That's almost a weird form of bullying. But because of the environments I came from, nothing really fazed me. Whatever the headwinds were, would just keep going. So I would say to people, have that mindset. Just be professional, be polite, be respectful of authority as much as you can, uh, and listen. Like Rachel said earlier, like listen to people that people have been there before you. You should hear them, but be true to yourself too. And the song that I mentioned at the beginning, where I said I had this song constantly running around my head, and I sent it to Bella. It's Vienna by Billy Joel. And we're going to put
Mm.
that link in the talking points that go out with this podcast because people should listen to it. He actually did his 100th month sellout at Madison Square Garden on TV. Did you see that, Rachel? Do you track Billy Joel or anything that goes on
Oh,
with that?
my husband and I went to Billy Joel. When was it? Like 5-ish years ago. It was
At,
great.
at the Garden?
At the Garden, of course. Yes,
Right. So
it
he
was
just did his
amazing.
100th sold
Did he
out
really?
show there last week or the week
Okay, so
before.
ours was probably
And
like
he
the 40th or 50th, maybe.
maybe. So he played Vienna and he goes, this was a song I never cared about, but everybody loves it. And there's a reason that everyone loves that song, or at least his fan base loves that song, is because it's talking about what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Slow down, you crazy child. So you don't want me singing it, but we're going to put it in. And I wish I would have done more of that professionally and personally. Like I missed big chunks of my personal life because of work, because work is life for me. And I shouldn't have done that because work isn't life. I mean, you need a paycheck. You got to take care of your family. You got to take care of yourself. But that's why I said to Bella before the call, I couldn't tell by the look on her face how she took it. But youth is wasted on the young, and I don't mean that in an ugly way. I just mean like, man, if this 50-year-old brain was in that 26-year-old self, woo! I don't know what I'd be able to accomplish with all that runway before me because we end up with less runway ahead of you than behind you at my age. Sorry, Rachel, at my age. So that's what I mean by that. Like if you could switch a little bit of it around. And last piece for me, and then I'll kick it back to you, Rachel, and you can close this down, is find a mentor.
Yes.
A lot of people don't do that. Like find someone that is not in your chain of command. Do not grab a mentor or somebody in your food chain because it's not the same. Like find somebody you respect, and it doesn't have to be a 4-star general or the head of HR at a company. It can be anybody who has similar life experiences or maybe an alternative view of a similar life experience that you can share with freely. And but then you have to be open to whatever they tell you and try it in your own way. But that's one of the things I got right in the beginning was I grabbed mentors and listened to people, and I didn't always execute it with the speed I probably should have. The things I was told or the things I learned, and then find if you can get lucky and you got a boss that'll help groom you, grow you, show you doors to walk through and how to walk through them. Man, hold on to those folks. So that's it for me. Go ahead, Rachel. You can take us to our next episode and close us down.
Yeah, just some comments on your last remarks before we do that. It's interesting because you were given a sort of a hidden message, right, in that book that was placed on your desk that you were kind of moving too fast. I was given feedback also, right? So I think you and I are similar in that we're driven and we're doing the work because we're responsible. We want to finish what we started, and we feel a sense of obligation to whoever's giving us a paycheck. I think there's some other people that behave that way and do those things because of their own self-importance, because of their own egos, because of their own grandiosity, right? And I think for people who are observers or are experiencing this aggression or speed, they may not know enough about the people doing it to interpret the reasons. And so sometimes there are assumptions made. And so when you were given that, you reacted like, great, I'm awesome. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. So I was told early on in my career, oh, you're really forward for your level. You need to wait until somebody at a higher title weighs in before you give your opinion on something. Right. Like I was on a call once. I remember this so clearly. And it was me and my boss, and I think my boss's boss. And there was some sort of conversation, and we were making a decision, and nobody was talking. Like whoever it is was like saying, okay, so what do you think we should do? And like nobody said anything. And there was this awkward silence. I knew the answer. So I just chimed in and I'm like, hey, we should do that. And then I got feedback after, like, oh, that was inappropriate, or you crossed your boundary or your level. And so then what I did was I overcompensated and I didn't speak up after that because I didn't ask for more
Ah,
clarity on what the expectations were. right? And so I
Okay.
think we've been giving advice mostly to early career professionals, right? Saying, hey, slow down, check in, be curious, ask questions, get clarification. But my advice to leaders and managers and supervisors of early career professionals is give them more detail. Sometimes the shorthand we use in corporate America may not be understandable to them. Like we may say, hey, slow down, or you're being Machiavellian, or you're too big for your britches, basically. But we're not giving enough examples or enough guidance. And so if you have the privilege to lead and guide an early career professional, give them details, give them the speed limit that you want them to go on, but also some of the context and the reasoning behind it so that they can interpret and that they don't, uh, bump into any of these challenges. So that would be
I
my
love that you said. I
my
love that
words of
you
wisdom.
said leadership. I love that you said leadership is a privilege.
It is.
It's not a right.
It is.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, when you're responsible for someone else's mortgage, their rent, their car payment, feeding their kids, growing them so they can be as successful as they want to be or they can be, that's I see it as a gift. So
Oh
I'm glad
yeah,
that you said that.
you're helping build habits. So yeah, we'll talk about more about generational differences and learning from each other probably in another episode. But
Yes,
thank
we
you for joining us today. This has been a great conversation, and we have something fun slated for our next episode. The day that Patrick and I decided to do this podcast, I opened a Google Doc and I started typing like 20 something questions that we could potentially ask each other. And I looked back at them the other day, and some of them are really good questions. And so our next episode is going to be a lightning round where we're going to ask each other these questions, and you get to hear the responses. Please continue to provide us feedback either in the comments or the reviews, or just send us a message if you know us and tell us if you're finding this useful or interesting, or if we can adjust, or if there are any topics that you're curious about. We would love your input so that we can make this great.
great couple weeks, everybody. We'll talk next time. Rachel, I appreciate you. Be well,
Take
guys.
care. Bye.